Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story so devastating it will leave a mark on you long after it ends, set in the ruthless silence of the American frontier, where the desert wind carries the scent of smoke and blood. It's a place where survival is law, and love is a dangerous trespass between enemies. It began with a single footprint in the dust. Small, deliberate, almost invisible, but powerful enough to burn down a home, shatter a daughter's world, and bind her fate to the very man who led the raid. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The dawn came thin and pale over the Arizona territory, the kind of light that promised nothing and took everything it could. Zola Flint stirred on the narrow cot, the rough wool blanket scratching against her arms. The cabin smelled of pine pitch and yesterday's coffee grounds, familiar enough to fool a body into thinking the day would be ordinary. She swung her legs down, bare feet meeting the cold dirt floor, and pushed the door open with her shoulder. Outside, the world had gone quiet. No wind moved the scrub oak leaves. No birds called from the junipers along the dry wash. Even the distant bawl of the milk cow had stopped. Zola stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, listening to the silence press against her ears like a held breath. She saw it then, a single track in the dust near the corral, a moccasin print, shallow but deliberate, pressed where no foot from their side had any business being. The print was fresh, the edges still sharp. Zola's stomach tightened, but she did not move. She simply looked at it the way a person looks at a rattlesnake coiled on the porch, knowing better than to scream. Alvis Flint stepped up behind her, boots heavy on the boards. He carried the old Springfield in the crook of his arm, not raised, not yet. His eyes followed hers to the print. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air smelled of dry grass and iron, the way it always did before a storm, though the sky held no cloud. "Stay inside," he said, voice low, the words more habit than command. Zola did not answer. She watched her father walk out into the yard, slow, deliberate, the rifle barrel catching the first slant of sun. He stopped at the corral, squatted, touched the edge of the print with 2 fingers. When he stood again, his shoulders had set harder, the way they did when he checked the fences after a hard wind. She stepped down off the porch anyway. The dirt was cool under her feet. She crossed the yard, stopping a few paces behind him. The print looked small, almost careful, as though whoever left it had not wanted to disturb more than necessary. "Apache," Alvis said, not a question. Zola nodded once. She had seen tracks like this before, farther out, near the old spring. Always at a distance. Always a warning. Alvis rose, dusted his hands on his trousers. "Could be scouts, could be nothing." He glanced toward the ridgeline where the Chiricahua mountains rose dark against the sky. "But the quiet's wrong. Birds don't shut up unless something bigger's moving." Zola felt the words settle in her chest like stones. She wanted to say it was nothing, that they had lived here 3 winters without trouble, that the land was big enough for both sides if everyone kept their distance. But the silence kept pressing, heavier now, and the print refused to disappear. She turned back toward the cabin. Alvis followed, slower, eyes still on the ridge. Inside, he set the rifle against the wall, barrel up, and poured the last of the coffee into 2 tin cups. The liquid steamed, black and bitter. They sat at the rough table, not speaking, only the faint creak of the roof timbers overhead. Zola wrapped her hands around the cup. The heat burned her palms, but she did not let go. She thought of the stories she had heard in the trading post at Tombstone. Raids that came at first light, quick and clean, gone before the smoke cleared. She thought of the woman who had lost her husband and 2 boys the summer before last, how she had walked into town hollow-eyed and silent. Zola had given her a blanket. The woman had taken it without a word. Outside, the silence stretched thinner, tighter. Then came the sound. Low at first, a distant drumbeat of hooves on hardpack. Not many. Not yet, but enough. Alvis set his cup down. The tin rang softly against the wood. Zola looked at him. His face was calm, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been yesterday. He reached for the rifle without hurry. "Get the shotgun from under the cot," he said. She did not move at once. The hooves grew louder, steady, coming down the wash. Zola felt the cabin walls press closer, the air inside suddenly thick with the smell of old wood and gun oil. She stood. Her bare feet left faint prints in the dust on the floorboards. She knelt, pulled the scattergun free, felt the cold weight of it in her hands. When she rose again, Alvis was already at the door, Homon, watching the yard. The hooves stopped. For one long breath, the world held still again. Windless, birdless, breathless. Then the first shout cracked the silence, sharp and alien, followed by the unmistakable snap of a bowstring. Alvis raised the Springfield. Zola stepped to his side, shotgun leveled, heart hammering so hard she tasted iron in her mouth. The ridgeline above the wash bloomed with shadows, dark shapes moving fast, painted faces catching the light. They came down like smoke, and the quiet was gone forever. The hooves thundered closer, shaking the dry earth under the cabin floor. Zola gripped the shotgun tighter, the walnut stock slick against her palms. Alvis stood framed in the doorway, Springfield leveled steady, breath even as though he were sighting a deer at the edge of the clearing. The first arrow came low and fast, punching through the door frame an inch from his shoulder. Wood splintered. Alvis fired once, crack sharp in the still air, then stepped back as shadows poured over the ridge and down the wash. Painted faces, dark hair streaming, bodies low and swift. Chiricahua. They moved like the land itself had decided to rise up. Alvis worked the lever, chambered another round. "Zola, back!" She did not move. Her feet had rooted to the boards. The shotgun felt heavier now, useless in her hands. Outside, the first warrior reached the corral, knife flashing as he cut the milk cow's throat. Blood sprayed black in the dawn light. The animal dropped without a sound. Another arrow hissed past, burying itself in the wall behind her. Zola flinched, finally, the motion jerking her forward. Alvis fired again. A warrior spun, clutched his side, fell rolling in the dust. But more came. 10, 12, shadows multiplying against the rising sun. They reached the porch in a rush. One kicked the door wide. Alvis met him with the butt of the rifle, bone cracking against bone. The man staggered. Another lunged from the side, blade low. Alvis twisted, but the steel found his ribs. Short, hard thrust. He grunted once, low in his throat, and drove the rifle barrel into the attacker's face. The man dropped. Zola raised the shotgun at last. Her finger found the trigger, but the world narrowed to the sight of her father. Blood blooming dark across his shirt, spreading like spilled ink. He turned toward her, eyes wide not with fear, but with something quieter, something final. "Run," he said. The word barely left his mouth before the next warrior closed. Bonito. Tall, scarred chest bare under streaks of black and red paint, hair tied back with rawhide. He moved without sound, knife already red. Alvis raised the Springfield one last time. The hammer clicked empty. Bonito drove the blade home, once, deep under the ribs. Alvis's knees buckled. He did not cry out. He simply folded, slow, like a felled pine giving way to the axe. His hand reached toward Zola, fingers open, then closed on nothing. Zola screamed. The sound tore from her chest, raw and useless, swallowed by the crackle of fire as torches caught the roof thatch. Smoke rolled in, thick and choking. She swung the shotgun blindly. The stock caught a warrior across the jaw. He reeled, but another was already there. Bonito stepped through the doorway. His eyes met hers. Dark, steady, no anger, no triumph, only purpose. He reached out. His hand closed around her wrist, iron hard, calloused from years of bow and knife. Zola twisted, kicked, felt her heel connect with his shin. He did not flinch. He simply pulled her forward, out of the burning cabin, past her father's body lying face down in the dirt. The yard was chaos, flames licking the walls, warriors dragging what little they could use, blankets, tools, a sack of cornmeal. Bodies lay scattered, 2 settlers from the next claim over, throats open, eyes staring at the sky. Zola's legs gave. She stumbled, knees hitting the ground. Bonito hauled her up without pause. He dragged her toward the horses waiting at the edge of the wash. Rough rope bit into her wrists as another warrior bound them, tight enough to draw blood. She was lashed to the rear of a paint pony. The lead rope knotted to the saddle horn. Bonito mounted without looking back. He touched the pony's flank once with his heel. They moved out. Behind them, the cabin roared into full flame. Timbers cracked and fell. The roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Zola twisted in the ropes, straining for one last look. Smoke towered black against the pale sky. Through it, she could still make out the shape of her father, motionless, small against the burning walls. The last thing she saw was the Springfield lying in the dust beside him, barrel still warm. The pony lurched forward. The rope jerked her off balance. She fell, knees scraping rock, then was dragged upright again. Dust filled her mouth, her eyes. The thump of hooves, the creak of leather, the low mutter of Chiricahua voices. All of it blurred into one steady rhythm. She did not cry. Tears would have been wasted on the dry wind. Instead, she stared at the ground passing beneath her feet. Rock, thorn, dust, and felt something inside her tear loose and burn away with the cabin. The Thung Lung lay ahead, hidden between high ridges. Smoke still rose behind her, thinner now, drifting east on the morning breeze. Zola knew without asking. She was the only one they had taken. The others had been left to the fire, and the quiet that followed was worse than any scream. The sun climbed slow and merciless, turning the trail into a furnace of white dust and sharp rock. Zola walked behind the paint pony, wrists bound tight with rawhide that had already worn through skin. Each step pulled the rope taut, sending fresh stings up her arms. Blood trickled in thin lines down her palms, drying dark against the rope before the next jolt opened it again. The air tasted of alkali and horse sweat. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. The column moved in loose order. Warriors ahead, women and pack horses in the middle, the few children kept close. They rode without hurry, eyes sweeping the ridges as though the land itself might answer back. Bonito led, sitting straight, the fresh cut on his shoulder crusted under a strip of buckskin. He did not look behind him once. By midday, the heat pressed down like a hand. Zola's lips cracked. Her tongue swelled against her teeth. She stumbled once, knee buckling on loose shale. The pony jerked forward. She caught herself, teeth clenched, refusing the small sound that wanted out. A warrior glanced back. Brief, unreadable, then turned away. They stopped at a narrow seep in the rock wall, water trickling slow and clear into a shallow basin. The women dismounted first, filling gourds without waste. Zola was left standing, rope still knotted to the saddle horn. No one offered her water. She watched the children, sprouts, small and quick, dip their hands and drink. One boy, no more than 8, stared at her a long moment, eyes wide and dark, then looked away when Zinnia spoke a low word. The column rested only long enough for the horses to breathe. When they moved again, Zola's legs felt wooden, each step a separate effort. The Chiricahua mountains rose ahead, jagged and close now, swallowing the horizon. She kept her eyes on the ground, watching the dust rise and settle, watching the shadows lengthen. Anything to keep from thinking of the cabin, of Alvis's hand reaching and closing on air. She did not beg. The thought came once, sharp and hot. Drop to her knees, call out for mercy, promise anything. But the words died in her throat before they formed. She had seen how they looked at the other captives taken that morning. 2 men from the next claim, bound and dragged a mile before being cut loose in the open, left to walk or die. They had not been kept. She had. Why? The question sat heavy in her chest, unanswered. She watched the warriors' backs, the way they rode without wasted motion, the way the women moved among the horses with quiet purpose. No one struck her. No one spoke to her. They simply kept her alive, measured, as though she were a thing whose use had not yet been decided. Late in the afternoon, the trail narrowed into a slot between high red walls. The sun dropped behind the rim, throwing long blue shadows. The column halted again. Zola was untied from the pony, rough hands, no gentleness, and led to a small overhang screened by juniper. A blanket was dropped at her feet. No fire, no food. She sank down, back against cool stone, wrists still bound in front. The rawhide had swollen with blood and sweat. Pulling hurt more than leaving it. She sat there as dusk gathered, listening to the low voices of the camp, women murmuring, a child's soft laugh cut short, the soft scrape of moccasin on rock. No one approached. She drank nothing. Her throat burned, but thirst was cleaner than asking. Night came full and cold. Stars sharpened overhead. Zola pulled the blanket around her shoulders with bound hands, the wool rough against sunburned skin. She thought of Alvis's face in the last moment. Not fear, not pain, only the quiet knowledge that the day had ended. She closed her eyes against the memory. It stayed anyway. Footsteps approached. Soft, deliberate. Zola opened her eyes. Zinnia stood there, face half lit by the faint glow of a distant fire. Older, lines deep around the mouth, eyes steady and unblinking. She carried no weapon, only the weight of age and certainty. Zinnia looked down at her a long moment. Then she lifted one hand, palm open, and beckoned once. "Come." The word was English, rough-edged, spoken without warmth or threat. Zola stared. Zinnia did not repeat it. She simply waited. Zola rose slowly, joints stiff, blanket falling away. Her legs trembled under her. She took one step, then another. Zinnia turned and walked toward the center of the camp, where a small fire burned low, coals banked against the night wind. Shadows moved around it, tall figures seated in a loose circle, faces carved by firelight. Drift sat at the head, oldest among them, hair white as bone under a simple headband. The others watched Zola approach without expression. Calyx and Teal on one side, warriors silent on the other. A sprout hovered at the edge, small hands clasped, eyes fixed on her. Zinnia stopped at the circle's rim and gestured for Zola to stand where the firelight reached her. No one spoke. The coals hissed softly. Smoke curled thin and straight into the dark. Zola stood there, wrists still tied, dust streaked across her face, waiting for whatever came next. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate, as though the night itself were listening. And in that quiet, something shifted. Small, irrevocable, like a stone settling deeper into the earth. The elders had decided. They had not yet said what. The fire burned low in the center of the circle, coals glowing dull red under a thin skin of ash. Smoke rose straight up into the cold night, carrying the sharp scent of piñón and sage. Zola stood at the rim where Zinnia had placed her, wrists still bound, though the rawhide had loosened enough to let blood flow again. The heat from the coals reached her shins, but it did nothing for the chill that had settled deep in her bones. The elders sat cross-legged on hides worn thin by years. Drift occupied the place of honor, back straight despite his age, white hair tied with a single eagle feather. His face was carved from the same red rock as the cliffs above them. Lines deep, eyes black pools that caught no light. Around him the others waited in silence. 3 men, 2 women, faces shadowed, hands resting open on their knees. No one moved except to breathe. They spoke in Chiricahua, low and measured, words rolling like stones in a dry creek bed. Zola understood none of it, but the rhythm told her enough. Deliberation, not anger. Drift spoke longest, voice rough as gravel under boot. When he paused, the others nodded once, small motions, agreement without flourish. Zinnia sat to Drift's right. She listened, then turned her head toward Zola. Her English came slow, each word shaped carefully, as though the language tasted foreign on her tongue. "The wolf is sick," she said. "Fever burns him. Body fails." Zola's stomach dropped. She had heard the name whispered even back in the settlements. Bonito, the one they called the Wolf of the Cliffs, the shadow that moved through raids like smoke. She had not known he was here, in this hidden place, or that he could be anything but unbreakable. Zinnia continued, eyes never leaving Zola's face. "No woman of our blood may see him broken. To look upon the leader weak is to wound the spirit he carries, the spirit of the people. If it breaks, we break." The coals popped, sending a small spark upward. It died before it reached the dark. Zola felt the words settle like lead. She glanced around the circle. Faces remained still, but the silence had thickened, pressing against her skin. A sprout stood just beyond the firelight. Small boy, perhaps the same one who had watched her earlier. Eyes wide, unblinking. Fixed on her as though she were a thing newly arrived from another world. Zinnia's voice cut through again, quieter now. "You are not of our blood. You carry no shame for us. You will go. You will bring water. You will wash him. You will see what no other may see." Zola's head moved before she could stop it. Small, sharp shake. No. The motion was instinctive, the same refusal she had given the thirst on the trail, the same denial she had given the memory of Alvis falling. But Drift's eyes lifted then, meeting hers directly for the first time. They held no anger, no plea, only certainty, old as the mountains themselves. Zola's throat closed. She tried to swallow, found nothing there. The fire hissed again, louder in the quiet. Zinnia leaned forward slightly. "If you refuse," she said, "you die." The words landed flat, without threat or drama, a fact like the cold at night or the lack of water. Zola felt the circle tighten around her, not with hands, but with the weight of what had already been decided. She looked at Drift. His face had not changed. She looked at the sprout. The boy had not blinked. Her bound hands trembled once, then stilled. She thought of the cabin burning, of Alvis's hand closing on air, of the long walk behind the pony with no place left to run. Refusal meant an end here, quick and final. Acceptance meant stepping into something she could not name, something forbidden, something that would mark her forever. She nodded once. Small. Barely there. Zinnia rose without haste. She stepped to a low basket near the fire, lifted a clay bowl filled with water from the seep, and a coarse strip of woolen cloth, still damp from earlier use. She crossed the short distance and placed them in Zola's bound hands. The bowl was heavy. Water sloshed against the rim. The cloth smelled faintly of smoke and herbs. "First light," Zinnia said. "You go to his lodge." Alone. Zola felt the weight settle into her palms. The bowl was cool against her torn skin. She did not look down at it. She looked at the fire instead. At the coals that had burned steady through the night, giving light without warmth. The elders rose one by one, silent, dispersing into the shadows of the camp. Drift was last. He paused, eyes on Zola a moment longer, then turned away. The sprout followed him, small feet silent on the earth. Zinnia remained only long enough to point toward the lone lodge set apart at the edge of the trees. Stronger built than the others, hides stretched tight over poles, a thin thread of smoke rising from the vent hole. She said nothing more. Zola stood alone with the bowl and the cloth, fire dying at her feet. The night wind moved through the pines, carrying the faint scent of coming frost. She felt the first true touch of what waited inside that lodge. Not just a sick man, but a law she was about to break simply by obeying it. She turned toward the path. The coals behind her popped once. Final, like a door closing. Dawn was still hours away. But it would come. The first light came gray and thin through the lodge vent, carrying the chill of high country dawn. Zola stood outside the entrance a long moment, bowl balanced in her bound hands, water trembling at the rim with each breath she took. The hide flap hung heavy, smelling of smoke and tanned deer. She pushed it aside with her shoulder. Inside, the air was thick. Bitter herbs, sweat, the low metallic tang of fevered skin. A small fire burned in the center pit, coals banked low, throwing faint orange across the walls of stretched hides. Bonito lay on a bed of furs and woven mats, chest bare, rising slow and ragged. Scars crossed him like old trails, long white lines over ribs, a puckered knot below the collarbone, fresh red welts still weeping from whatever fight had left him here. His black hair spilled across the furs, damp with sweat. His eyes were open, dark, steady, watching the ceiling as though it held answers he did not like. Zola let the flap fall behind her. The sound was soft, final. She crossed the dirt floor on bare feet, knees folding under her beside the bed. She set the bowl down carefully, water sloshing once against the clay. The cloth lay limp across her arm. She lifted it, dipped it, wrung it out with fingers that shook. Drops pattered into the bowl like slow rain. She did not look at his face. Not yet. She focused on the shoulder nearest her, the skin hot, fever tight, a fresh gash crusted along the muscle. She pressed the cloth there, light at first, then firmer. Water ran pink down his side, soaking into the furs. Bonito did not move. His breathing stayed even, but she felt the heat rolling off him like an open stove. The fire snapped. Outside, faint sounds drifted through the hides. Moccasins on earth, a low voice calling a child, the soft whicker of a horse. Zola kept her eyes down. She knew they were watching. Through a narrow gap where the hides met the poles, she caught movement. Small figures at a distance, sprouts, 2 or 3 of them, standing motionless, eyes fixed on the lodge. They did not come closer. They simply stood, bearing witness the way children do when told to remember. She moved the cloth higher, along the collarbone, tracing the edge of an older scar. Her hand hesitated, only a heartbeat, then continued. The heat of his skin burned through the wet wool, searing her palm. She felt his gaze shift then, slow, deliberate, settling on her like weight. Zola kept working. She wrung the cloth again, water dripping steady into the bowl. She wiped sweat from his brow, from the hollow of his throat. Each pass felt heavier, as though she were erasing something that should not be seen. The silence in the lodge grew thicker than the smoke. Only the fire's soft crackle, his shallow breaths, the faint drip from the cloth. She knew what this meant. The elders had said it plain. No woman of their blood could look upon him like this. To see the wolf weakened was to wound the thing he carried, the strength that held them all together. She was outside that law, outside their shame. But the knowing did not make her hand steadier. Bonito's eyes never left her. They were not angry, not curious, only present. Watching, measuring. She felt the judgment in them, wordless, heavy as stone. She wanted to pull away, to drop the cloth and back out through the flap, to pretend she had never stepped inside. But the command of Drift and Zinnia still burned in her ears. Refuse and die. She dipped the cloth once more. Water ran cold down her wrist. She leaned forward, pressed it to the center of his chest where the scars crossed thickest. His muscle tensed under her touch, brief, involuntary, then held still. She felt the steady thump of his heart beneath the cloth, strong despite the fever. Zola's own heart answered, loud in her ears. She kept her face blank, kept moving the cloth in slow circles. But inside something cracked open, small, sharp. She was no longer the invisible prisoner dragged behind a pony. She was here, touching what no one else could, seeing what no one else was allowed. The knowledge settled in her like dust after a hard ride. She had crossed a line drawn long before she was born. She lifted the cloth, wrung it again. Drops fell into the bowl, rippling the surface. Bonito's eyes followed every motion. He did not speak. He did not need to. Outside, the sprouts still watched, small shadows against the morning light, faces solemn. One boy shifted his weight, then stilled again. They would remember this. They would carry it. Zola set the cloth across his chest, let it lie there. Her hands hovered a moment above his skin, then drew back. She stayed kneeling, breath shallow, waiting for whatever came next. Bonito's gaze held hers, long, unblinking. Then, slow, deliberate, his fingers flexed against the furs, not reaching, not resisting, simply closing. Once, as though testing the strength still left in them, the fire popped again, Outside, the day brightened. But inside the lodge, the silence stretched thinner, tighter, carrying the weight of what had just been done. And neither of them moved to break it. The days blurred into a rhythm of dust and heat and silence. Each morning the sky lightened pale over the ridges, and Zola walked the short path to the lodge carrying the same clay bowl, the same coarse cloth, water from the seep that grew shallower with every dawn. The camp watched her pass. Women pausing mid-task, warriors sharpening blades without looking up, children scattering like quail then turning back to stare. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. Inside the lodge, the air stayed thick. Smoke from the low fire, the sour edge of fever sweat, the faint green bitterness of healing herbs someone left in a bundle by the door. Bonito lay quieter now, the fever no longer raging but smoldering steady beneath his skin. His eyes followed her every time she entered. Dark, unblinking, clearer each day. He no longer stared at the ceiling. He stared at her. Zola knelt beside the bed of furs. She dipped the cloth, wrung it, pressed it to the long scar that ran from collarbone to ribs. The raised line felt hot under the wool, rough, like old rope. She moved slowly, tracing it without hurry, feeling the muscle beneath shift slightly when she reached the deepest part. Bonito's breath caught once, small, almost nothing, then steadied. He did not speak. She did not look up. Outside, the seep ran thinner. Warriors returned later each evening, horses lathered, empty-handed more often than not. The women rationed what little corn remained, grinding it finer, stretching it with roots dug from the hard earth. Zola heard the murmurs when she passed the cooking fires, low voices, clipped words she could not understand, but could feel. The land was turning against them. The drought had no mercy, and she, the outsider, was still here, walking where no one else could. She wiped sweat from his brow, from the hollow of his throat. Her hands had stopped shaking days ago, but the weight had not lifted. Each touch carried more now. The knowledge of what she was seeing, what she was keeping from the women who would never be allowed near him. She felt it in her chest like a stone settling deeper. Guilt for Alvis's memory, for the cabin that no longer stood, for the life she had lost. And something else, quieter, more dangerous. The beginning of pity. Not soft pity, hard pity. The kind that comes when you see a man carrying more than bone and blood. One afternoon, the light slanted low through the vent, turning the lodge walls gold and shadow. Bonito's fever had broken enough that he sat propped against rolled hides, back straight, despite the effort it cost him. Zola knelt, as always, cloth in hand, tracing a jagged scar along his forearm. The skin there was newer, pink at the edges. She paused. Only a second. Then continued. His voice came rough, cracked from disuse, but clear in English. "Why don't you run?" The words hung in the smoke. Zola froze, cloth dripping onto the furs. She had not expected sound from him. Not like this, not asking. Her eyes lifted slowly, met his. They were steady, searching. No mockery in them. Only the question. She swallowed once. The taste of dust and herbs stayed on her tongue. "Because," she said, voice low, almost lost in the crackle of the fire, "there's nowhere left to run." Bonito held her gaze a long moment. Then he looked away, toward the vent where the sky showed narrow and blue. His jaw tightened, just once. He said nothing more. Zola returned to the scar, pressing the cloth harder than necessary. Her heart beat loud in her ears. She had spoken. The first real word between them. And in saying it, she had admitted something she had not wanted to face. The cabin was ash. Alvis was gone. The settlements were days behind and closing. There was only this lodge, this man, this task. She could not refuse. She wrung the cloth again. Water dripped steady, rhythmic. Outside, a horse snorted. Footsteps passed. Warriors heading out with bows, faces tight, moving farther each day to find game that no longer came close. The seep would dry soon. The people knew it. She felt it in the way the camp tightened, the way eyes lingered on her longer when she left the lodge. She lifted the cloth to his chest, to the place where scars crossed thickest. Her hand lingered. Too long, feeling the slow rise and fall beneath. Bonito did not flinch. He watched her. Silent, as though waiting for her to decide something. Zola drew her hand back. She set the cloth across his shoulder. Let it lie. She stayed kneeling, breath shallow, the bowl cooling between her knees. A small sound came from the entrance. Soft. Almost nothing. She turned her head. Through the narrow gap where the hides met the poles, a sprout stood. Small girl this time, no more than 6, face half in shadow. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Zola's hand still resting near Bonito's chest. The girl did not move closer. She simply watched. Memorized. Zola felt the look like a cold finger down her spine. The child blinked once, then slipped away, silent as she had come. Bonito's eyes had followed the movement too. He said nothing. The fire popped softly. Zola picked up the bowl. Water sloshed against the rim. She rose, slow, joints stiff from kneeling so long. Outside, the day was failing, shadows stretching long across the valley. But inside the lodge, the silence had grown heavier, carrying the weight of what a child had just seen, and what she would carry with her. The moon hung low and thin over the valley, a silver blade against black sky. Zola moved through the camp shadows, bowl empty now, cloth folded damp over her arm. The night air carried frost and the faint dry scent of dying grass. Fires burned low in scattered lodges, voices murmured soft, then fell quiet as she passed. She kept her head down, steps measured, but her ears stayed sharp. She had meant to go straight to her small shelter at the edge. Instead, she stopped behind a cluster of pines near the council fire. The flames had been banked for the night, but coals still glowed enough to light the circle of elders. Drift sat at the center, white hair catching the faint orange. Zinnia knelt to his left, Calyx and Teal silent beside her. Warriors stood at the rim, arms folded, faces carved from stone. Zola pressed her back to rough bark, breath shallow. She should have walked on, but the low rumble of Drift's voice carried on the still air, pulling her like a rope around the waist. They spoke Chiricahua, words she could not follow, but the tone was grave, clipped. Drift gestured once toward the lone lodge where Bonito lay. Zinnia answered short, then fell silent. A warrior shifted his weight. The movement sent a small pebble rolling across the dirt. Then Drift spoke again, slower. Zinnia translated, voice low but clear enough to reach the pines. "He wakes," she said. "Strength returns, but the law holds. No woman of blood may stand near him while the weakness lingers. The spirit he carries, the wolf of the cliffs, must not be seen broken by those who depend on it. If our own look and see frailty, the chain breaks. The ancestors fade. The people fade. A long pause. The coals hissed once, sending a thin thread of smoke upward. Zola's fingers tightened on the cloth. She felt the words sink in, slow, heavy, like stones into deep water. She had touched him. She had seen the scars, the fever sweat, the way his breath caught when pain moved through him. She had kept it inside her these days, locked tight, because the elders had commanded it. Now the command had weight she had not fully understood. Not just survival for her, but survival for them. For the thing they called spirit. For the line that stretched back through grandfathers and grandmothers she would never know. Drift's voice came again, rougher. Zinnia did not translate this time, but the meaning hung plain. The weakness must be guarded. The outsider guarded it now. If she left, if she spoke, the chain would snap. Zola's throat closed. She pressed harder against the tree, bark biting through her thin shirt. She thought of Alvis's hand reaching, closing on nothing. Of the cabin burning. Of the settlements she had once called home. If Vexen's men came, if they found her, she could tell them everything. The hidden valley, the sick leader, the secret she carried. They would take her back. They would burn this place to ash like they had burned others, or she could stay silent, keep what she had seen buried, become the keeper of something that was not hers. The choice sat in her chest like a hot coal, burning either way. A distant sound cut the night, low, steady drumming from the far ridge. Not war drums. Not yet. Signal drums. Riders had seen something on the border trail. Blue coats, horses, rifles glinting under moonlight. Vexen's men drawing closer. The valley was no longer secret enough. The elders rose without haste. Drift stood last, leaning once on a carved staff, then straightening. The circle broke. Zinnia glanced toward the pines, brief, as though she had known Zola was there all along, then turned away. Zola waited until the coals dimmed to nothing. Then she stepped out, legs unsteady, and walked the path to the lone lodge. The flap hung open a crack. Inside, the fire had burned to embers. Bonito sat propped against the rolled hides for the first time, shoulders bare, scars stark in the faint red glow. His eyes lifted as she entered. They held hers. Steady. Knowing. He spoke, voice rough but clear. You saw. Not a question. A fact. Zola stopped just inside the entrance. The bowl hung heavy in her hands. She set it down without sound. Her wrists still bore the faint marks of old rope. Bonito watched her a long moment. Then he said, quieter, Now you are part of it. The words landed soft, final. Zola felt them settle in her bones. She could still run, slip out under darkness, find the trail, risk the warriors or the soldiers or the desert itself. But the memory of his scars, of the fever heat under her cloth, of Drift's voice at the fire, they were inside her now. To speak them to outsiders would break more than a man. It would break a people. She took one step closer, then another. She knelt beside the bed, slow, deliberate. Bonito did not move. Zola reached out, hesitant, fingers trembling once, then rested her palm flat against his chest over the oldest scar. Not washing now, not tending, simply touching, acknowledging. She nodded once. Small. Certain. Bonito's eyes did not leave hers. The embers popped softly. Outside, the drums continued, low, steady, coming closer. The night held its breath, and something in Zola gave way, not with sound, not with tears, but with the quiet finality of a door closing behind her forever. The night split open with the first distant crack of a spring field. Not close yet, still echoing off the high ridges, but close enough to wake the valley like a slap. Zola stood just inside the lodge flap, the empty bowl forgotten at her feet. The air outside tasted of pine and coming smoke. Inside, the low fire had burned to dull red embers, throwing faint light across Bonito's scars. He rose without sound. One moment he lay propped against the hides. The next, he stood. Slow, deliberate, testing the strength that had returned in pieces over the days. The old wounds on his chest and shoulder still showed angry red under the glow, but he moved as though the pain belonged to someone else. He reached for the war shirt folded nearby, pulled it over his head with a single stiff motion. The cloth caught on a fresh scab. He did not flinch. Zola watched him. Her fingers tightened on the coarse wool cloth, still damp with his blood from the last tending. The fabric smelled of iron and herbs and him. She did not drop it. Outside, the camp stirred. Moccasins slapped earth. Low voices rose, urgent, clipped. Warriors appeared in the firelight, faces already streaked with black and red, bows in hand, quivers slung. Horses snorted, hooves shifting restless. A woman called a child's name once, sharp, then fell silent. The drums started then, deep, steady, rolling up from the lower valley like thunder trapped underground. Not celebration. Warning. The seep had gone dry 2 days before. The last hunt had brought back only a single thin deer. The land had nothing left to give. Now the blue coats had found the trail. Bonito stepped past her to the entrance. He paused beside her, close enough that she felt the heat still rising from his skin. His eyes swept the camp, quick, practiced, taking in the torches moving along the far ridge, the flicker of lantern light, the dark shapes of mounted men pouring through the narrow defile. Vexen's men. Springfield barrels caught the moon. Metal gleamed cold. A voice carried on the wind. English, rough, calling a name. "Flint! Zola Flint! If you're alive, show yourself!" The words cut through the drums like a knife. Zola's breath caught. She did not move. Her eyes stayed on Bonito. He had not turned at the sound of her name. He simply stood, shoulders square, watching the torches spread like slow fire across the grass. A sprout darted past the lodge. Small boy, the same one who had watched through the gap days before, eyes wide, feet bare on the cold earth. He stumbled, caught himself, then stopped a few paces away. He looked back at Zola. Not at Bonito. At her. As though memorizing the moment she stood beside the wolf of the cliffs, while the valley burned toward them. Bonito's hand lifted, slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed her shoulder, light as a falling leaf, then rested there. No grip, no pull, just the weight of his palm through the thin fabric of her shirt. Warm, steady. The first time he had touched her without purpose of restraint or command. Zola felt the contact like a brand. She did not pull away. She did not lean in. She simply stood, cloth still clutched in her fist, the old blood on it flaking dry against her skin. The drums pounded louder now, mingling with the snap of rifle fire from the ridge, testing shots, warning shots, Horses screamed. A woman's cry rose sharp and was cut off. The soldiers were closer. Their torches threw long shadows across the valley floor. Voices shouted orders in English, harsh, familiar cadences that once meant safety. Now they meant fire and lead and the end of this hidden place. Zola's eyes lifted to Bonito's face. His jaw was set, eyes fixed on the advancing line. He did not speak. He did not need to. The hand on her shoulder said enough. He would fight. The people would fight, because the land left them no other way, because to lose here was to lose everything. The ancestors, the wolf spirit, the thin thread that kept them Apache. She could still run. Break from the lodge, cross the open ground, raise her hands to the blue coats. They would see her, dirty, bruised, alive, and take her back. She could tell them where Bonito lay, how weak he had been, how the valley hid behind these ridges. They would believe her. They would end it. Or she could stay, stand beside the man whose scars she had washed, whose fever she had cooled, whose secret she now carried like a stone in her chest. Bonito's fingers tightened, just once, then released. He stepped forward into the doorway, war shirt dark against the night. Warriors moved to his side without word, bows drawn, faces painted for what must come. Zola remained where she was. The cloth in her hand felt heavier now, the dried blood flaking away like old ash. She looked out at the torches, at the shadows of men who had once been her people, at the valley that had become hers in ways she could never explain. She did not step forward. She did not step back. The drums rolled on. A rifle cracked closer, sharper, angrier, and the silence between her and Bonito stretched thin as wire, humming with what neither had yet said aloud. The valley floor had become a furnace of smoke and noise. Torches guttered in the wind, throwing wild shadows across the grass. Arrows hissed overhead like angry hornets. Springfields answered with sharp cracks that split the night. Warriors moved low and fast, bows drawn, bodies painted black and red under the moon. Bonito led them, not shouting, not gesturing grandly, simply stepping forward into the open, war shirt dark with old sweat, knife in one hand, the other empty but ready. Zola stood at the lodge entrance until the first bullet whined past close enough to stir her hair. Then she moved. Not running, walking, straight into the chaos. The ground shook under boots and hooves. Smoke clawed at her throat, thick with the stink of black powder and burning sage. She pushed through it, eyes stinging, cloth still clutched in her fist like a talisman she no longer needed. The line of blue coats had pushed halfway across the valley floor, carbines leveled, horses sidestepping, nervous. Their torches lit faces she might have known once. Hard men from forts and patrols, men who had ridden through other valleys like this one. A voice rose above the din. English. Raw. There. The girl. Flint's daughter. Zola stopped in the open ground between the two lines. Arrows still flew, lead still answered. She raised her arms, not in surrender, but to be seen. Her voice tore out, hoarse, breaking on the edges. "Stop!" The word cracked like dry wood. A few rifles wavered. Warriors paused mid-draw. Bonito turned his head, only slightly, eyes finding her through the smoke. She took one step closer to him, then another. Warriors shifted, uncertain, bows still taut. The soldiers held fire, confused, waiting for orders. Zola's voice rose again, louder, raw with everything she had swallowed these weeks. "I'm alive because of him!" She pointed, arms straight, finger steady, toward Bonito. Bonito didn't kill me. He saved me. He's no monster. Not to me. Tears cut tracks through the soot on her face, but she did not wipe them. Her eyes stayed locked on Bonito. He stood motionless, knife lowered, chest rising slow. The scar on his shoulder glistened fresh in the torchlight. For one long breath, the valley held still. Smoke drifted lazy between the lines. A horse snorted. A child's cry, cut short, came from the lodges behind. Then a rifle spoke. Not aimed, not careful, just blind. The bullet struck Bonito high in the shoulder, same side as the old wound, tearing through muscle and cloth. He jerked once, hard, like a man hit by a falling branch. Blood bloomed dark and sudden, soaking the war shirt. He staggered half a step, but did not fall. His knife hand tightened. The blade gleamed red in the firelight. Zola screamed, wordless, torn from deep in her chest. She ran the last distance, knees hitting dirt beside him. Warriors surged forward, arrows knocked again. Soldiers shouted, carbines rising. But for that second, the lines held, frozen by the sight of the white girl kneeling in the open, hands pressing against the wound on the man they had come to kill. She tore the cloth from her fist, pressed it hard to the hole. Blood soaked through instantly, warm and thick against her palms. Bonito's breath hissed between his teeth. He did not push her away. His free hand came up, slow, fingers brushing her wrist once, then falling back. Zola leaned close, forehead almost touching his. Tears dripped onto his chest, mixing with the blood. "No," she whispered, voice cracking. "No, don't take him from me." The words were small, private, lost under the wind and the crackle of distant fire. But Bonito heard. His eyes, dark, steady even now, held hers. No anger, no plea, just recognition. The thing between them had been spoken at last, in blood and smoke and silence. Behind her, the sprouts huddled at the edge of the lodges, small shadows against the burning grass. One girl, the same who had peered through the gap days before, stood apart, eyes wide, unblinking, watching the white woman kneel over the wolf of the cliffs, hands red with his blood. The child did not cry. She simply stood, remembering. The soldiers hesitated. A sergeant barked an order, harsh, uncertain. Warriors drew bows tighter. Bonito straightened slowly, pain carving lines around his mouth, but he did not drop. He lifted his chin toward the line of blue coats. Small motion. Final. Zola stayed where she was, kneeling, pressing, refusing to move. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of powder and burning earth. A second rifle cracked. Wild, high. The valley waited, and the silence between the two lines thickened, heavy with what could not be taken back. The first gray light seeped over the eastern ridge, thin and reluctant, as though the sun itself hesitated to look upon what the night had done. Smoke still drifted low across the valley floor, curling around blackened grass and the charred frames of fallen lodges. The air tasted of spent powder, scorched earth, and the faint copper of blood. No birds called. No wind moved the pines. Only the soft crackle of dying embers broke the quiet. Bonito lay where he had fallen, back against a low rise of rock, legs stretched out in the dirt. The war shirt hung open, soaked dark across the shoulder. His chest rose and fell, slow, shallow, but steady. The bullet had torn through muscle, not bone. The bleeding had slowed to a thick seep. His eyes were half open, fixed on nothing in particular, the way a man looks when pain has burned past anger into something quieter. Zola knelt beside him. Her hands pressed the folded cloth, now stiff with dried blood, against the wound. She had not moved since the soldiers pulled back. Her knees ached against the cold ground. Her arms trembled from hours of pressure. She no longer cried. The tears had dried to salt tracks on her cheeks, leaving white lines through the soot. Her eyes stayed on Bonito's face. Empty now, but steady. No plea in them. No regret. Only the quiet knowledge that she had chosen, and the choice could not be unmade. Around them the camp gathered itself without hurry. Warriors moved among the wreckage, silent, faces still streaked with paint, retrieving arrows, gathering what hides and blankets had not burned. Women led the few remaining horses, children trailing close, small hands clutching skirts. The seep was gone. Only cracked mud remained where water had once run. The grass that had fed the ponies was ash. The valley still held them, but it held less now. Scarred, smaller, forced to move again. Vexen's men had withdrawn in the dark hours, horses stumbling, voices cursing the smoke and the cost. They had taken their dead and wounded, left the rest to the land. No pursuit, no final charge. Just retreat, ragged and angry. The blue coats would return, stronger perhaps, but not tonight. Zola felt the shift in the air, the way the camp no longer looked at her as outsider nor as prisoner. She was simply there, part of the silence, part of the cost. Bonito's hand moved, slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed the back of hers where it pressed the cloth, not grasping, not pushing away, just resting, warm against her cold skin. She did not pull back. She did not speak. The touch said what words never could. Acknowledgement. Survival. The thing between them had been forged in blood and smoke, and it would not be spoken of. A sprout approached, small girl, the one who had watched from the shadows night after night. She carried nothing, asked nothing. She simply stopped a few paces away, another child clinging to her hand. Their eyes, wide, dark, fixed on Zola and Bonito, on the cloth pressed to the wound, on the way Zola's shoulders stayed straight despite the ache. They did not cry. They did not run. They watched. And in their watching, the memory settled, quiet, permanent. Zola looked up once. The girl met her gaze, unblinking, then looked away toward the horizon where the sun would soon rise. Zola reached down with her free hand. She scooped a small handful of ash from the nearest dead fire, gray, still warm at the core. She brought it close, hesitated only a heartbeat, then let the fine powder sift through her fingers onto the wound. It clung to the blood, darkening the cloth, sealing it in the way old women sealed cuts with earth and prayer. No words, no chant, just the act. Simple, final. A gesture older than any of them. Bonito exhaled once, long, slow. His eyes closed briefly, then opened again. He did not thank her. There was no need. Zola sat back on her heels. The ash clung to her fingers like dust from a long road. She wiped them on her skirt, slow, mechanical, then rested her hands in her lap. She looked toward the ridge where the soldiers had gone. The sky there was empty now, pale and indifferent. She looked back at Bonito. His breathing had steadied. The valley lay quiet around them, scarred, breathing shallow, waiting for the next move. The people would leave soon, pack what remained, follow the old trails to new water, new grass. They would carry the scars. They would carry the memory. Zola stayed where she was, kneeling, watching. Part of it now. The girl and the child turned away, small hands linked, walking toward the others. No backward glance. The sun lifted higher. Light spilled across the valley floor. Cold, clear, unforgiving. Zola did not move. The silence held them all. And in that silence, the land remembered. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.